Welcome to Kibbe on Liberty. So Logan, I was watching your interview that you did at PorkFest with
Yes.
with one of your I don't know if he's a pagan friend, but someone that you met who is part of the pagan community.
He's a friend now, I would say.
Yeah. And I learned a lot, and for those who aren't going to run screaming from this episode, I would encourage them to go to Free the People's YouTube page and watch this conversation, because I am guilty of doing something that you talk about at in the end of the book when we're all together at Free the People, and we're always kind of teasing each other about our different religious faiths, and for reasons that was not curated by me, we have one of almost everything on our team.
Yeah, we do.
But I'm the guy that's when you're talking about paganism, I'm the guy that immediately strawmans you and says, "So you're running around in the woods sacrificing animals or something," and maybe you're passively aggressively talking about me at the end of the book. But I thought it was funny.
It is funny, and I don't mind being teased about it. I think the stereotypes are funny, but only when people really take them seriously is it a problem. But
yeah,
most people don't.
So I want to get into your book, and there's a couple themes I definitely want to talk about that I know you want to talk about as well. But I was thinking about it in the context of just reading the morning news and what I would consider one of the fundamentally American principles that also happens to be a very libertarian principle, which is freedom of religion, and your freedom to sort of choose your faith and live your life as you see fit, believe the things that you want to believe, as long as you don't hurt people or take their stuff. And I think a lot of Christians in America are now feeling like they're the persecuted ones, being targeted by the woke culture, cultural Marxists, whatever that thing is, and particularly that masterpiece cake maker
Right.
in Colorado, and they just keep going after him, and it's one thing after another, and this poor guy just wants to run his business and properly represent his faith and his beliefs. And in America, we think that you should be able to do that. And one of the things that libertarians, they would die on this hill, at least most of us who are libertarian would say, he has a right to not bake a cake. And to me, this is something that makes America special. Like we're the one place in the world, maybe there's other places where we are tolerant of a broad diversity of religions, even though I think most Americans identify as Christian.
It's like 80%, I think.
Yeah,
it's pretty high.
But that makes it sort of unique that in a nation that is dominated by Christians, we allow for the rest of the weirdos like you to exist.
Absolutely.
And thrive. And as far as I know, we haven't tried to burn you at the stake.
Not yet. It's I've gotten away with it so far.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean no one has a monopoly on spirituality or truth or anything like that, and it's nice that we live in a country where people can experience their faith, their spiritual, whatever it is, in any way they want to without being persecuted for it. And you're right. Like, I think the Christians are a target because they've been dominant for so long, and people feel like it's like why white men are still a target of everything, because they've been dominant for a long time. People feel like they could get away with it, but you shouldn't be attacking people for their beliefs as long as they're not hurting people. I agree.
Yeah. And I think the origin of that with the founding fathers was perhaps a sense of persecution colonists felt, and things that they fled, but I think it was more fundamental than that. They wanted to create a nation that was built on the individual and not some collective.
Yeah, and they wanted a nation where the church wasn't running the show.
Yeah.
That's the whole point of the First Amendment, apart from the free speech aspect of it, which is important. But the separation of church and state in the First Amendment is about, we came from countries where the government and the church were synonymous, and we don't want that here. We want a separation, and the separation goes both ways. They don't want the government interfering with the churches, and they don't want the churches interfering with the government.
Yeah. So let's talk about the book.
Okay.
And I have your other book because I think it's relevant, and people that are huge fans of the show will remember we had a conversation about a book that you wrote a couple years ago called Conform or Be Cast Out, The Literal Demonization of Nonconformists. And again, like, I think that theme's going to run through, I hope it runs through everything that we do at Free the People, certainly everything that I believe, but it certainly applies to the First Amendment and religious freedom. Your right to say things that people disagree with, your right to believe things that people disagree with, your right to be yourself. And that to me is not only a fundamentally American thing, but a fundamentally libertarian thing. And so the book we're going to talk about today is Libertarian Paganism, Freedom and Responsibility in Nature-Based Spirituality. And I tease you about this too, because when you told me you were writing a book about libertarian paganism, I'm like, that is a very niche market for this book. Because as a libertarian, I happen to think that libertarianism is tragically too niche of a market, and when I talk about it, I try not to use an ism. I just try to talk about these common sense values. But you're going to try to find a market in, I guess this is a global market now, but for libertarians who are at least curious about what is this word paganism.
Yeah. So the reason I wrote this book is because I've been a libertarian for a long time, and I was always kind of spiritually interested. I felt like there was something lacking in kind of scientific materialism. I knew that there was some sort of mystical dimension to the world, or at least I felt that there was, and I wanted to get in touch with that, and I felt like it was something that was important to me, and I couldn't find place where I really fit. I tried to explore like the dominant religions that we have on this continent, and they weren't doing much for me. And I happened upon paganism about 15 or 16 years ago. And I found it really connected with me. And for a long time, I thought these were completely separate things. They were unrelated to each other. And as I learned more about it, I started noticing that it actually is not separate at all. Like, the reason that I'm attracted to paganism is the same as the reason that I'm attracted to libertarianism. There's a lot of commonalities. And I started talking to people in the movement, and I started reading books. And I kept hearing pagans say things that sounded very libertarian. And I was like, they don't identify as libertarians. They think of themselves as something else for the most part. There are some who do, but they mostly don't identify as libertarians. But they have these instincts that are similar. And I thought that was interesting. And I hadn't seen anyone else do any work on the topic. Whenever I write a book, I try to do something that no one else has done any work on. I don't want to just reproduce what someone else has already done. And I thought, well, this is new. I Googled the phrase libertarian paganism, no results. So I thought there's an opening here for me. And yeah, it is a niche market, but I feel like we're in a place in America right now where a lot of people are like me, and they feel like they're dissatisfied with the major choices that have been presented to them by politics. They don't like the red team. They don't like the blue team. They feel like there's got to be something better. And they're dissatisfied with the major choices that have been presented to them in spirituality and religion. They don't necessarily want to be Christian. They don't necessarily want to be atheist. They don't necessarily want to be Jewish, but they want something. And I think this is a book for people who are feeling spiritually homeless and politically homeless and think maybe there's another option out there, and they can check it out. And if they find that it speaks to them like I did, I hope that they will get something out of it. And it's not meant to be evangelical or convert anybody, but it's meant to just be a resource of information for people who are searching.
You're not trying to make America a pagan nation?
I'm really not. I really have no interest in whether people convert to paganism or not. I don't care. But it worked for me. And so I just wanted to put that out there for other people who might find it interesting. And like you said, there's a lot of ignorance and misinformation about it. People don't know what it is. People think of it, particularly Christians, they think of it as some sort of devil worshipping demonic thing, which it isn't at all. It's a beautiful, life affirming, nature affirming religion with nothing sinister in it whatsoever. But people just don't know, and they hear the word and they have these preconceptions in their mind. They have these stereotypes in their mind, and I wanted to do a little bit to dispel that as well.
Yeah, I knew nothing about it, and I knew that the stereotypes that I was throwing at you were exclusively drawn from movies as opposed to reality. Mm-hmm. And I want to puncture some of the myths and get into what it is, because I've watching you talk about it. I didn't realize that you were a pagan when we first met, and I guess I should be ostracized for knowingly hiring a pagan. I mean, that's outrageous.
I wasn't really when we first met. I was still kind of figuring it out. I didn't start calling myself a pagan until about 5 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's, I mean, I guess maybe about 5 years ago, first started hearing about it.
Mm-hmm.
But before we sort of puncture some of the myths and get into some of the themes that I find pretty compelling and universal, like I don't think these are uniquely pagan values. I think they're hopefully human values. But the one thing you said that I've been fascinated with is this struggle between wanting a sense of belonging, but also not wanting to have to sign on the dotted line that in order to belong to group X, you have to obey everything. You have to believe everything. You're either with us or against us. And I think there's this dynamic, not only American culture. I think it's happening everywhere where people desperately want that sense of belonging. A lot of those old top-down institutions have collapsed because of technology and disintermediation, my favorite word.
Yep.
But it doesn't change the human need to belong to something. And we were talking about this yesterday when we were traveling, that in a kind of a superficial way, but not. I get that from going to a Dead show.
Yeah, totally.
And I love being around 20,000 other people who are totally into the same thing. And you immediately, like, you don't know anybody, but you're friends with everybody almost immediately, and right. you get to hang out, and you always leave with new relationships and new friends, and it's a sense of belonging that no one had to sign up for some religious creed or political manifesto to do that.
Right.
And I think there's something human about wanting that sense of belonging. At Kibbe on Liberty, freedom is a lifestyle 24/7, something you live and breathe and wear every day. If that describes you, you need the very best Liberty swag in the market today, just like this shirt I happen to be wearing. Go to freethepeople.org/KOL and check out our exciting merch. You too can love Liberty and look cool.
Absolutely. And this has been a great source of community for me. There's a group in Washington, D.C. where I live that I hang out with. I've been a member of them for like 3 or 4 years now. And they're great people. And I really have made a lot of good friends through that. And we get to celebrate holidays together and show up and do things together. And it's a nice sense of community. And apart from the spiritual component of it, we all unite around the thing that we commonly believe. But you get to meet people that way. It's always nice.
Yeah. And your favorite bar where you guys gathered was just a victim of lockdowns.
Yeah, we had a wonderful bar called Hex that was up in Shaw, and it was a little kind of pop-up bar that was witchcraft themed, and it was so great. And we used to spend every night of the week there pretty much. And unfortunately, they were a victim of the lockdowns and have not survived. So we're a little bit still searching for a place to have a regular meeting now that our old haunt has met its demise.
It's funny that you call it a haunt.
That may have been deliberate.
Yeah. Nothing like a good pagan joke. But so speaking of pagan jokes, what are the most ridiculous straw man arguments against paganism? What do people think when they hear this word?
Yeah, I think we should kind of start by defining some terms, because your audience will not be familiar with what neo-paganism is really. Pagan. The word pagan is a Latin word that means country dweller. It comes from when the Roman Empire was Christian, and they were making fun of all the rural hillbillies and hicks who worship the old gods and had not been converted. So pagan is a basically catch-all term for, at the time it was non-Christian, but it has come to be a catch-all term for people who buy into sort of pre-Christian traditions, polytheism. It's a very multicultural and eclectic term. It's an umbrella term. It encompasses a lot of different traditions. It's not just one thing. The most popular in America version of paganism is Wicca. But that's just one. There's new druids, and there's people who are attracted to the Greek and Roman gods. There's people who are attracted to the Norse pantheon of gods. It's essentially just a non-monotheistic set of religions where you have a more pluralistic idea of what divinity is. And it's very deeply connected with nature and the natural world. There's a sense of, in the ancient world, it was really important that you knew what was going on with nature because your survival depended on it. So knowing what the sun is doing, knowing what the moon is doing, knowing what the seasons are doing, you had to be connected to that. there's a sense of wanting to get back to that in modern paganism. And most people will call it neo-paganism these days to differentiate it from these ancient traditions. I don't like the prefix neo. I find it aesthetically unpleasing, so I don't use it. I just say paganism. But it's not one thing. It's a whole variety of things. And it's a very beautiful thing. It's about celebrating life. It's about celebrating nature and the seasons. And it's about finding the divine in the natural world.
It's essentially... a collection of different faiths and beliefs and traditions that were pre-Christian.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there's many different varieties. I mainly focus on the book on the Western European tradition because it's what I'm familiar with. But there's, Native American paganism, there's Hawaiian paganism, there's Asian paganism. It's all over the place. And I don't know very much about those traditions, so I don't really talk about them. But they exist. And there's African paganism, there's all sorts of stuff. But the modern neo-paganism movement basically grew out of Britain, where there was this 19th century occult society called the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, where essentially a bunch of bored Victorian rich kids got together and wanted to resurrect some of these ideas. And they cobbled together these practices, these ritual practices out of ancient Jewish mysticism, ancient Egyptian mythology, Greek and Roman mythology, a bunch of medieval angel summoning, they're called grimoires, kind of textbooks. They translated all this out of Latin and Greek and Egyptian and Hebrew, and they came up with this thing. And one of the members of that group, named Gerald Gardner, broke off and founded Wicca. He had claimed that he had encountered a witch cult in the forests of Britain, and that they had an unbroken oral tradition going back thousands of years, and that he was resurrecting that. That claim is pretty spurious. Like many religions, there is a lot of kind of shared mythology around paganism that isn't necessarily historically accurate or true, but it's fun. But there are certainly aspects of it that date back thousands of years, but the way it's celebrated in modern times can't really authentically be claimed to be an ancient religion. It was pieced together through a lot of different traditions and sort of formalized codified in like the 1950s when the witchcraft laws were repealed in Britain and you could actually come out into the open without getting arrested for doing it.
Yeah. It strikes me that tradition, I mean, there's a lot of Norse iconography there. And I'm naturally thinking of Tolkien and Lord of the Rings. How much is he personally responsible? And he was a Christian, right?
Oh yeah, Tolkien was a devout Catholic.
Yeah,
very serious Catholic.
But he, in a lot of ways, he popularized these mythologies, right?
Well, I don't think there's much of a connection between Tolkien and paganism. Tolkien was very influenced by the Old Norse sagas, like the Icelandic sagas and things like that, and Anglo-Saxon, like Beowulf, those type of things. But he didn't incorporate too much Celtic mythology into his myths. There's a lot of Celtic influence, and so I wouldn't say there's too much of a connection there, but it was happening around the same time. Like the Lord of the Rings was published in the 1950s in Britain, and Wicca was coming out in the 1950s in Britain. So maybe there was this sort of hunger for nostalgia of the old ways and mythology and fantasy that was around in the atmosphere at those times. So I don't know.
So Gandalf is not a pagan?
Well, I would say no, because Gandalf worships Eru, the one Iluvatar creator who created the entire Middle-earth cosmogony. I think that's the word. So the Middle-earth religion is very monotheistic. So I would say it's not pagan at all.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
That won't be the last stupid question I ask.
But you asked about stereotypes,
yeah.
And a lot of people's opinion of paganism is it's Satanism, it's devil worship, it's sacrificing goats, it's child abuse. I write about in both this book and my last book a little bit, the Satanic Panic, which was a big thing in the United States in the 1970s and 1980s. And it was this mass hysteria where everyone became convinced that there were Satanists hiding around every corner, that were kidnapping children and sacrificing them and abusing them and giving them drugs and all this stuff. And it was almost entirely made up. It was all fake, but it gripped popular imagination. And there's still kind of holdovers from that, where people still have that idea of like every Halloween, this is like our Halloween show. Every Halloween, people will say, "Oh, there's madmen out there putting razor blades and LSD in your children's candy." It never happens. It's all made up and fake. But these sort of urban legend fears persist around that kind of stuff. And I don't know any pagans who sacrifice animals. I certainly don't know any pagans who sacrifice humans. There are pre-Christian traditions that did that because the ancient world was a fairly savage world in a lot of ways. But that doesn't mean that that's what modern pagans do. And we certainly don't worship anything like a devil. Like the gods that we identify with and that we talk about tend to be very positive, uplifting gods, and they're not the Christian God, but they're good gods all the same.
So the theme that really comes out in your book is more about you want people to appreciate the history of paganism and the values that you draw from it. But I think the purpose of your book, you said, was to actually try to turn on some of your fellow pagans onto the values of libertarianism. Thank you for joining me today on Kibbe on Liberty and for being part of our fiercely independent audience. Every week, my organization, Free the People, partners with blazetv to bring you this show. My guests bring smart perspectives on everything from current events to timeless philosophical debates. If you like what you hear, go to freethepeople.org/KOL and support Kibbe on Liberty so we can continue to produce these honest conversations with interesting people. Now, let's get back to it.
I think that's true. Like I said, most of them don't identify as libertarian, and I don't want to be an evangelist. I don't want to convert anybody if who doesn't want to be converted. But I noticed that there's this trend of thinking and talking that sounds libertarian to me. And I feel like a lot of people just haven't heard that term and don't know what it means. Or maybe they have stereotypes about it, just like we have stereotypes about pagans. They think of libertarians as these hyper-selfish, greedy capitalists who want to just destroy everyone else and get their own thing, which is not at all my experience with libertarians. And so I thought, well, there's some common ground here. And I noticed as I get older and a little bit more mature, maybe it will get less combative. And I get where I want to bring people together and make them understand each other a little bit better rather than just fight all the time. There's too much fighting as it is. And so instead of having these stereotypes about each other, I want us to be able to talk to each other and say, we may not agree on everything, but we have some common ground and we can understand where we're coming from. So that's sort of one of my goals of the book.
I think I was thinking about this morning, and I think that obviously we share that goal that we want people to better understand each other and not other each other, because othering and caricatures and misconceptions about who other people are is how tyrants and statists get us to fight each other.
Yeah.
And
the other point I want to make about this very quickly is this book is not really about politics. And I'm not telling anybody how to vote. I'm not telling anybody what party to register for. There is a Libertarian Party with a capital L, but that's not what I'm talking about when I'm talking about libertarianism. I'm talking about small L, philosophical libertarianism. It's a worldview. It's a way of understanding society and power and hierarchy. And, some pagans are going to disagree with me on a lot of policy, and that's fine. But I'm not just saying, like, you're a libertarian if you're for low taxes. You don't have to be for low taxes. You can be for whatever you want. But I'm talking about it as the worldview of your basic attitude towards authority, your basic attitude towards power, and towards pluralism, towards a tolerance for uncertainty, all these kind of what I consider to be basic libertarian worldviews that don't necessarily have to do with policy or politics, who you vote for, what party you register for.
My impression from your book is that your community of pagans doesn't spend a lot of time fighting with each other, even though you're coming from a tradition that perhaps has more nooks and crannies and factions than almost any other belief system I've ever seen. And I'm thinking about the Libertarian Party for a second, how they spend all their time fighting each other about the minutia of the shared faith. But you don't see that in paganism, or is it just that you've chosen your community that doesn't fight? You
definitely see it in paganism a lot. There's a lot of disagreements, very passionate disagreements within it. In the particular group that I spend time with, we get along pretty well. And I think I'm fortunate that the people who are members of that group are, for the most part, peacemakers, and they don't want to fight with each other, and that's good. But one of the things that that made me realize that libertarians and pagans are similar is how difficult it is to get pagans to organize and get them to be in a group together, because they're very solitary, they're very independent, and when you try to force them into the confines of a group, they rebel. It's like herding cats, which I find to be a very charming tendency. I really like that about people who refuse to be confined to a group. There was a great example in the book about, there's a pagan publisher called Llewellyn, and they tried to organize in the 70s a Council of American Witches, where they're like, we're going to get all the Wiccans together, and we're going to set out the rules of the religion, and we're We're going to set out, we're going to make everything official the way it's going to be. And everyone just went nuts. They were like, no, we're not doing that. That's garbage. We have no interest in being told what to think or what to do. Everyone split and went their separate ways, and the whole thing blew apart instantly. Like, you can't organize. And I love that. And it's the same thing with libertarians. You get libertarians together and try to get them to agree on anything. It's going to be a disaster. And I love that. I think that shows that we're independent thinkers and that we have our own views about things, and we don't want to be told by other people what we have to think or what we have to believe.
So you've reminded me of a project that we've been talking about for years, and because we're doing this show, I think we should proceed with it. I've always wanted to find a way to sort of puncture some of the caricatures of libertarianism, because I think we're guilty of the caricature of us is that we're a bunch of isolated, radical individualists who are atheists. We don't believe in anything. We don't really believe in community. We mock religion, and I don't think any of that is true. So, like, there's this project that I want our colleague Sam to take on and explore Christian libertarianism,
right,
which is a real thing, and look at different faiths and creeds, and from that process draw some pretty common sense human values. And that's what I before we started, I accused you, not really, of plagiarizing my book, Don't Hurt People and Don't Take Their Stuff.
Available at fine bookstores everywhere.
Available. By the way, the hardcover is virtually impossible to find. But in the first chapter of this book, I half jokingly but very seriously try to mash up a lot of different belief systems and mash them all together, including Ayn Rand, who was very influential on me when I was a kid. Most importantly, Adam Smith and the theory of moral sentiments, but all sorts of libertarian philosophies, some of whom would never even use that word, of all faiths and all creeds, and come up with these shared human values that bind us, bind the civilized free world. And those rules were, and the reason I'm not actually accusing you of stealing this, I'm pointing out that you can derive these basic human values from lots of places, and you have as well. Don't hurt people, don't take their stuff, take responsibility, work for it, mind your own business, fight the power.
Yes.
All of those values are expanded upon in your book about paganism.
Yes, all of those values are things that I see in the pagan community, which I find very interesting. There's not a lot of rules in the pagan community, which I like. There's no 10 Commandments of paganism. There's no Pope of paganism. There's no Bible of paganism. There's no sacred text you have to adhere to. There's no leader you have to listen to. There's one guideline that it shows up in Wicca called the Wiccan Rede, and it's a little rhyme that goes, eight words the Wiccan Rede fulfill, and ye harm none, do what you will, which basically means don't hurt people and don't take their stuff. Do whatever you want as long as you're not hurting other people. And I came across that.
So I stole it from the Wiccans.
Well, and then the Wiccans kind of stole it from this famous British occultist, Aleister Crowley, who said, do what thou wilt should be the whole of the law. Love is the law. Love under will. And that's his famous saying. And it's often misunderstood, but a lot of it is, do what you want to do, but don't hurt any other people.
Everything I know about Aleister Crowley I learned from Ozzy Osbourne, by the way.
That's a great song.
Has an epic song about Mr. Crowley.
It's a great song. I get yelled at on YouTube for pronouncing his name Crowley the way that Ozzy Osbourne does. Apparently he pronounced it Crowley, rhymes with holy. And I did a video on him.
Who are you going to believe?
Well, yeah, I did a video on him, and I get like hundreds and hundreds of comments saying, you're pronouncing his name wrong. But I like Crowley better than Crowley, so I tend to say it that way, and people can just deal with it.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's that basic ethical tenet in Wicca and in paganism in general, which is you're basically free to do what you want. We're not going to tell you what to do, but don't hurt other people. And there's also a sense of responsibility in that the things that you do affect the world and they affect you, and you have to live with what you do. And so be careful. If we're not going to tell you not to do certain things, but if you do it, you're going to have to live with what you did. So think about that. And I think that's a very great way of looking at ethics. And instead of writing down a list of prescribed rules, it's almost a cop-out. It's like, I just have to follow the rules that are written down, and I'm off the hook. This is more, it reminds me of this project we did on restorative justice, where instead of just doing your prison sentence and being done, you have to confront what you've done and live with it and make amends for it. And it's much more emotionally difficult to do that than to just think, well, I followed the rules, I'm off the hook.
If you've made it this far into the show, it means I must be doing something right. Kibbe on Liberty is just one of the amazing products we created for the people. We tell emotionally compelling stories and produce educational videos for the liberty curious. Our award-winning documentaries personalize all things liberty, independence, creativity, hard work, integrity, and perseverance. After the show, check out our work at freethepeople.org. And if you like what you see, donate to support what we do. That's freethepeople.org. Now back to the show.
You know?
In my book, I describe it as looking in the mirror every morning. Mm-hmm. Liberty means looking in the mirror every morning and holding yourself accountable. It's not even about what someone else judges you for. The greatest burden of that responsibility is imposed by yourself.
Yes. And that seems to be the ethos that I've detected in the pagan community as well. Is they don't tell you what to do, but if you're doing bad things, it's going to come back to bite you eventually. And it's not quite a belief in karma, but it's a little bit similar to that in that you're hurting your own life by living a bad life. You want to live a good life.
What other values? Let's talk about fight the power.
Okay.
Because there is this reaction, I think, against an imposed set of rules that are non-debatable and that you just comply with, right? So pagans don't have that.
No, we don't. And I think a lot of the fight the power analog would be in the fact that paganism was illegal for many years and that we have things like the Inquisition and the Salem witch trials. And there was a lot of persecution, religious persecution of pagans over the years.
Yeah.
And so there tends to be a lot of skepticism towards centralized authority structures that want to tell you what to do and what to think. And that comes from, being fearful for your life because the Catholic Church is going to come and get you. And we don't have that anymore, obviously, but there's still, that residual feeling of resentment towards powerful people that are trying to control your life and stop you from doing what you want to do. So I do detect in paganism a deep skepticism towards authority and towards power and towards centralization, because again, it's not a centralized religion. There's no pope, there's no sacred text, no one can tell you how to practice it, and anytime anyone tries to tell them how to practice it, they get very angry and they rebel and they go off and do something different.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's fight the power is definitely a big part of it. And there's also a big stream of social justice activism within paganism, and that tends to be a little bit more left wing, but I think there's a sense of social responsibility that a lot of pagans have.
Yeah, it's such a as Hayek pointed out, the term social justice renders the word justice meaningless,
Mm-hmm.
but I think it's just it's a blank check to like, I'm actually sort of, if I didn't know how it was being implemented, I'm attracted to that, because I do think there is a social aspect of justice, as you're saying. Like you a good person cares about the people around them, and they care about the community, and they will take some responsibility for that. That is, in a libertarian rendering, very much self-imposed. Like,
right.
You're not being a good person because someone told you to be. In fact, that's not how you can be a good person. Obeying an order is very different than doing the right thing.
Yeah, I've always felt that the order thing sort of negates the whole concept of morality. If you're doing something because you're afraid of punishment for not doing it, if you're just doing it because you're being coerced into doing it, that's not morality. There's no free choice in that. And so having that more open-ended morality system where it's like, you can do what you want, but you have to live with it, that's real morality. That's real choice. Instead of you have to do what we tell you to do because otherwise you're going to jail or otherwise you're going to hell or something like that. I struggle with that in terms of thinking it as an active participatory morality, because you don't have a choice. You have to do it.
Right. So you talk about the Inquisition, which
Mm-hmm.
which perhaps was the one of the famous examples of intolerance of religious dissent, and perhaps one of the reasons I'm making this up because I don't know the history, but I'm assuming that attitude is very much what influenced the founders to come up with the idea of religious freedom, and the corruption of the collusion between governments and states,
Yeah.
Particularly the Catholic Church.
Well, yeah, the Vatican being basically in charge of all of Europe for several hundred, maybe 1,000 years, is it was the status quo for 1,000 years, and it was kind of inconceivable that you'd have anything else. But it's a little bit frightening when the Vatican decides that they want to go after Jews, or they want to go after pagans, or they want to go after Protestants. Well, maybe we shouldn't have someone who's going to go after all the other religions being in charge of the entire continent of Europe.
Yeah. I'd also observe that, and this is a theory I have that I believe to be true, that a lot of my Mormon friends have a very keen sense of religious freedom because they also have been persecuted, particularly in the United States.
Yeah.
And I suspect that experience, experiencing intolerance, even being made illegal, has to be something that motivates people to sort of pursue that freedom side of the theology itself.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's still, I mean, it's mostly legal now, but there's someone the other day was telling me they ran up against an anti-fortune telling law in one state. They were doing tarot readings for someone, and they were trying to shut her down because they said fortune telling is against the law. So you have to put a disclaimer on your tarot reading saying this is for entertainment purposes only. This isn't fortune telling, in order to get away with it. Like, a lot of these laws persist, and a lot of these attitudes persist. It's kind of interesting.
Well, if it saves just one life.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. The other thing that I think, another caricature of libertarianism that makes your morphing of these two worldviews interesting to me is the belief that somehow we don't give a crap about the world and the environment and the planet and living in a clean and healthy world. I've never accepted that caricature, but there's a lot of the talk in your book is about the beauty of the world around us.
Yeah.
And that sort of drives your particular version, your personal value system, your paganism.
Yeah, I think that there's a sense in a lot of other religions, not just Christianity, but most other religions, that the world is somehow fallen or broken or sinful inherently, and that like the goal of life should be to escape the world. And like, what this life is pretty bad, but when we get out of it, we'll go to heaven and things will be better, or we'll reincarnate as something better, or we'll ascend to the Elysian fields or enlightenment or whatever. Pagans don't have that. Like, we like the world. The world is great. We like our lives. We don't really have strong beliefs about the afterlife. Some people believe in reincarnation. Some people believe in various forms of the afterlife. But for the most part, we're living for today. And we want the world to be nice because we're living in it. And we think it's great. And all of our stuff is here, which is pretty good. So there's that very... I find it a very joyful religion because we're really appreciating what's around us. And we're not just waiting for what comes next. And there's a strong environmentalist current within the pagan movement. But I was a little bit surprised to find that not all, I mean, there certainly are pagans like this, but not all pagans are like want strong environmental regulation from the government. I read some books where they were saying, yeah, we have to protect the environment, but it's a cop-out to have the government do it for us. We need to do it. It's our responsibility as individuals to take care of our environment, which I think is much more what I'm sympathetic to, because I think the environmental regulations that the government imposes tend to have a lot of unintended consequences and negative side effects, and they end up making people poor when they don't need to be making people poor. And so having it as a personal duty rather than something you hand off to someone else to do for you is a very libertarian idea.
By the way, it's a bit of a cop-out because, a real environmentalist is someone that takes responsibility for stewardship of the land and rational use of scarce resources and all of that paradigm. It reminds me a little bit of the cop-out on taking care of communities. Like if you believe in a strong welfare state, you probably also believe, well, someone else is going to take care of it, so I don't have to worry about making sure that people in my community are not suffering.
Right.
And it's two different paradigms. One, again, going back to looking in the mirror, like, are you taking responsibility for your own life, and are you living the kind of life that doesn't hurt other people or take their stuff? Obviously, if you're destroying the planet, that's fundamentally inconsistent with this value structure. The other thing, I don't think it's in the book, but maybe it is, because I looked at a couple things in the last couple days preparing for this. But in your conversation, which you can find, what's it called? The YouTube video you did.
It's just called "What is Libertarian Paganism," and it was released a few weeks ago, and it's a conversation I had at PorcFest 2022. With Devin Rogers. Sorry, Devin Hunter is someone else. Devin Rogers, who is the founder of the New Vinland Temple. It's like a Norse sect of paganism.
So the other, the elephant in the room, the belief system we haven't talked about is Ayn Rand's sort of rational atheism.
Right.
And
this is where this conversation is going to get spicy.
well, what was interesting, I don't know, you should say what you want to say, but Ayn Rand's atheism would be another thing. I remember, I'm going to screw up this story, but I was on Bill Maher, and I was debating in the green room the science guy and Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Oh, he's the worst.
Don't ever go on a show with Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Oh, he's terrible.
Because he cannot shut his mouth. Like,
he loves the sound of his own voice.
On and on. And he the first thing he had done research on me, and he knew I liked Ayn Rand, and he confronted me in the green room as if he had discovered like nuclear fusion or something. He's like, "Did you know that Ayn Rand was an atheist?" And I'm like, "Really?
Yeah.
Wow, I didn't know that." That story has nothing to do with anything, but your friend on that podcast pointed out that a lot of people in his community are actually Randians.
Yes.
So we have Randian pagans,
Yeah,
which is
we do.
going to explode the heads of some of my Randian
Well,
friends.
if you want to really explode their heads, then listen to what I'm going to say next, because Ayn Rand's philosophy was extremely influential directly on the foundation of the Church of Satan by Anton LaVey. And, I want to debunk the whole thing about Satanism real quickly, because people think that paganism and Satanism are the same thing, which they're not. Satanism is a little bit adjacent to paganism, but it's not what people think it is. It's not worshiping the devil. It's a mostly atheistic political philosophy that basically is interested in, they're largely anti-Christian, but they're not demonic. They don't believe in supernatural powers or anything like that. They believe in the separation of church and state. They try to, they usually sue the government to try to get them to tear down the 10 Commandments in front of courthouses and stuff like that. That's mainly what they do. But they have a list of like rules and commandments, basically, the satanic commandments, and they're basically Ayn Rand's philosophy. It's all the stuff she talks about valuing yourself and building things and making things, being an entrepreneur and not giving away all the value of your labor to the moochers and all that kind of stuff. It's all the same stuff. And it's interesting because like people have such a negative stigma against Satanists, which is sort of the Satanists' own fault for adopting that terminology. But they're provocative and they like to kind of get on.
Yeah,
attention.
I would say worst branding ever.
Yeah, but they get on television. Whereas if they were just a bunch of atheists who were complaining about this stuff,
they're being trolls.
They're being trolls for attention deliberately so that people will notice them, which they would not notice them if they were just a bunch of atheists. So I did a podcast with a man who I really like from the Satanic Temple. He's not the Church of Satan. It's a different organization. And they're lovely people, really nice people. I like them a lot, and they don't worship evil. They don't sacrifice babies or anything like that. Everything you think you know about Satanism is wrong. It's basically a Randian, Nietzschean sort of, philosophy of exalting the self and exalting individual freedom.
Yeah.
So I talk about that a little bit in the book, but it's one of those difficult areas to talk about because people have such a negative reaction as soon as you mention it.
I'm going to go out on a limb and guess that Ayn Rand would not approve.
Probably not, but Ayn Rand didn't approve of a lot of things, including libertarians.
Right. Yeah. Well, we're going to debunk that. So that the end of this part of the story is that this project where I want to talk to Christians and Mormons and Jews and objectivists about different ways that you can get to what are basically different versions of the golden rule.
Yeah.
Do unto others as you would do to yourself. Live and let live. Don't hurt people. Don't take their stuff.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people very much believe in these core values. I think they're fundamentally human values, and you can apparently get there many different ways.
Yeah, I like to say there are many paths to the top of the mountain. There's different ways to get there, and I'm happy for other people to take whatever path works for them. But some version of that commandment is present in pretty much every religion and every philosophical system that deals with ethics or morality. It's in its history. Like people will say that the 10 Commandments, they come from Judaism or come from Christianity. Like those same rules exist in the Code of Hammurabi from the Babylonians. These basic moral values of don't kill people, don't steal from people. They're necessary for civilization. They're necessary for living together. And so any successful civilization has had some kind of version of those, because if you don't, you're not going to be a successful civilization.
Yeah. And the idea, again, promoting my book, available in all good bookstores. Isn't it disgusting that I'm promoting my book on a show about your book.
Well, it's fine. I'll just hold up mine for the camera as well, so everyone can see.
It's exploitive, but I always half joke that if Adam Smith could tweet about the theory of moral sentiments, it would be don't hurt people and don't take their stuff, and he,
but with a thick Scottish brogue.
Yeah, which I can't do.
Right.
You can do, and you're welcome to try. But
that's okay.
There's heavily influenced, I think, by the Christian values that he was surrounded by. So I want to pursue all those things, and more to the libertarian point, we have to get to a point where we're willing to at least hear the other person out.
Yes.
Unless you believe that the state should mandate religion X and impose it on everybody, do a new inquisition and punish and jail and perhaps murder unbelievers, we're going to have to figure out a way to get along.
Yeah.
And that only works in a society that is free and tolerant, and also built around a simple set of rules that don't punish the minority.
Yeah, and one of the things I like about the pagan community is it tends to be very inclusive. I think it was a Washington Post article that called it the most LGBTQ-friendly religion in the country. They try not to exclude people based on identity, based on politics, based on all kinds of various things, based on race, based on gender, sexual orientation, anything like that. They want everybody to be part of it because they know what it's like when they're persecuted, and they know what it's like when people are trying to go after you because of something like your faith. And so they tend to be very, very open and welcoming. And the fact that paganism is itself an umbrella term that encompasses many different traditions, you sort of have to let those people in and welcome them. There are a few, sects of paganism that are a little bit more restrictive, and they're like, you have to do it our way or the highway. But I don't know those people, and I don't spend time with those people. So they're very welcoming and lovely people, in my experience.
Yeah. The choice is quite simple. If people have made it this far in this podcast without canceling me, and everything else, the choice for the future is quite simple. You can either choose cooperation and tolerance and empathy and understanding where other people are coming from, and working through persuasion as opposed to coercion, or you can choose violence.
Right.
And violence is top-down, government-imposed compliance with somebody's plan, somebody's value set. I am not aware of a single place in the world ever where that system based on violence has led to human prosperity and harmony.
I'm not aware of it either. It seems like the most violent places in the world tend not to be nice places to live. So, I think being anti-violence is such a huge core of my libertarian beliefs. People are asking me to explain libertarianism to them, I've tried many things over the years. It's always hard to come up with a way of explaining it. And the way I always explain it nowadays is I just want our interaction as people to be on a voluntary basis. I want there to be consent between what we do. I don't want it to be forced on me or forced on you or forced on anybody through violence or threats or coercion or anything like that. I think the best way for people to live together is voluntarily.
Okay, so what else haven't we talked about that you want to talk about? This is your hour, even though I've been promoting my book this whole time.
The one other thing that I wanted to mention a little bit is what I view as like a tolerance for uncertainty that I think unites libertarians and pagans. Paganism is a very searching sort of religion. I don't know very many dogmatic pagans who are like, this is the way things are. It's a sense that there's a spiritual dimension to the universe, and it's our job to discover what that is and to figure it out for ourselves. And some people want to worship Apollo, and some people have a more kind of subjective or psychological approach, where like these divine forces are more aspects of our own subconscious. It's a more subjective approach to religion, and we, even within the group that I hang out with, we disagree. Some people have more strong views about what gods and goddesses are, and some people have more wishy-washy views, or like I kind of do, sort of more of subjective or metaphorical understanding of what these things mean. And that's okay. Like, we don't have to know everything. We don't have received wisdom come down from on high that tell us what's right and what's wrong. And I think that's something that's very true of libertarians as well, because we reject these centralized pronouncements from above saying this is the way things are. We want to question it and find out for ourselves. And there's a constant learning of new things, and there's a constant reevaluating our worldview and figuring out what's going on. And the whole idea of a free market system is we don't know what price things should be. We don't know how much bread should be produced. We don't know how many shoes should be produced in what sizes. We don't know any of that stuff. That's for people to figure out. And if you let people figure it out on their own, they're going to come up with great solutions because that's the way people are. But if you have one person at the top who says they know everything, it's not going to work out so well. And I think that's very similar to the way that pagans view their theology and their philosophy about the way the world works. Is we don't know what's true. We don't know what exactly the metaphysics of the world consist of, but we're going to keep looking into it and trying to figure it out and see what we can come up with. So that's another area where I think the two worldviews sort of overlap.
Yeah, and it's we were talking about this beforehand, and you and I have known each other for 12 years, something like that. It's hard to keep track anymore because we've known each other and been friends for a long time. And the team at Free the People, with the exception of Miguel, who's still going through the hazing period of our family relationship.
He'll get there eventually, another 10 years.
Well, we'll see. It takes about 10 years to get on board, but we do have basically one of everything. And one of the things that we do quite often when we're doing an otherwise semi-professional business meeting is we tease each other about our religion. Mm-hmm. And I think it's healthy. And somehow we're all very good friends and we get along, even though if we were to have to choose one set of personal values, one religion, we would probably break up the team.
Yeah.
And this is my plea to people that want everybody to be the same. Like it doesn't work that way, and I think that's what the founders had in mind.
I'm very much of the opinion that you make fun of your friends and you give them a hard time, and that shows that you care about them. If you were indifferent to them, then you wouldn't do that. But because you care about them, you want to just rib them and constantly poke at them a little bit. And I don't take offense at that at all, and I hope no one else on the team does because that's kind of how we operate.
Yeah. So, where can you get this intriguing new book, Libertarian Paganism, Freedom and Responsibility in Nature-Based Spirituality?
Well, I'm so glad you asked. It's being released on October 27th of this year. It is available wherever fine books are sold. You can get it on Amazon or Barnes & Noble if you're in the UK, Waterstones. It's published by a UK publisher called Collective Inc., and the imprint of that is called Moon Books. So you can go to the Collective Inc. website or the Moon Books website and order it there directly if you don't want to give money to Jeff Bezos, which I completely understand. And it's available now on paperback. Get it.
How many millions of copies do you think you'll sell?
Some fraction of 1% of a million, I'm sure.
And this is technically our Halloween special as well.
Yes, it is. Happy Halloween.
Do you want to plug your irrational enthusiasm for the Halloween holiday?
I love Halloween. I don't think it's irrational at all. It's a lovely time of year. Halloween's interesting. We just did, with my group, we did an interfaith conference where a bunch of people from other religions came to learn about paganism. And one of the people asked me about Halloween. And it's the thought that, like, that's the pagan holiday. And, like, what do you think about Halloween? And Halloween's interesting because it's sort of a blending of a Christian holiday called All Souls Day and a pagan holiday called Samhain, which is like a harvest festival that honors the dead and the ancestors of people. And so they're not quite the same thing, but there's this blending of the Christian All Souls Day and that pagan harvest festival where there's an emphasis on people who have died and passed on, and the idea that the veil between those two worlds is a little bit thin at that time of year, and maybe you want to give some acknowledgement and pay some respect to the ghosts in your life, essentially, for lack of a better term. So there's a little bit more of a reverential, spiritual take on Halloween, but I love the secular Halloween as well. I love all the ghosts and goblins and just the aesthetics of it. It's my favorite time of year, so I'm very excited. And in honor of that, I brought in this bottle of absinthe that we're drinking because it's the spookiest of all hard liquors, I think.
And is there anything special about this bottle?
It was given to me by a friend of ours, a mutual friend, Josh Withrow, on my birthday last year, and I've been saving it for a special occasion. So
okay,
this
cheers.
is that special occasion. Cheers.
Thanks for watching. If you liked the conversation, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and also ring the bell for notifications. And if you want to know more about Free the People, go to freethepeople.org.